Hi and welcome to the Home Assistant How-To with Bearded Thinker. Today we're going to work on our configuration files. We'll start in 10 seconds. Before we begin today's episode, I really would like to thank all the members who have joined my channel. Thank you. Your support means a lot. And now let's get back to video. As I mentioned in the intro of the video, today we are going to work on configuration files. Or, better to say, today we are going to be working on splitting our configuration files. Why would you want to split your configuration files? Let's look, for example, at my configuration files on my recording setup. Let's go to Visual Studio Code. No matter what editor you are using, the results will be the same. So no matter if you are using Visual Studio Code, my editor of choice, or you're using File Editor, or if you're using plain text editor, for example text editor inside Synology DSM. Let's go back to why we want to split the configuration. If you have been watching my videos, you know that my recording setup has various types of the sensors or devices separated in individual files, meaning that automations are inside automations.yaml file, binary sensors are inside binary_sensor.yaml file, main configuration and integrations are inside configuration.yaml file, and so on. Of course, one of the main files you want to have on your system is also secrets.yaml file. And in secrets.yaml file, you want to keep all your private data, for example, your email addresses, your usernames, passwords, API keys, and sometimes your longitude and latitude and things like that. So let's look at the sample configuration.yaml file I just created. In this sample configuration file, what I did, I removed some of the integrations that were in separate file and added them here just to show you how it would look if you would have everything in one file. Remember, this is not production system, this is a recording system, but still I have here a lot of integrations and a lot of sensors added. Yes, there are not a lot of lights here, but as I test every integration Home Assistant can have, I have a lot of integrations individually added. So let's look at the differences between this file and the previous one. Here I have embedded sensor and binary sensors, meaning that if we scroll through this file, you will notice that binary sensors are here. Let's scroll down. And here we have sensors added inside, meaning that everything I previously had in a sensors.yaml file, in this setup I have in one long file. So imagine that this is your system and that you want to find something. It can be very cumbersome to go through such a long file and to find an individual component you're looking. That's why when we started recording videos for this Home Assistant How-To, what we did at the beginning is that we defined some external files where we keep individual types of the sensors. Okay, that's great, and that works perfectly. If you are happy with it, you do not have to do anything, you can leave it as is. But what if you have a lot of automations, a lot of sensors, a lot of stuff inside your system? For that, let's go and check my main setup. This is my main setup and it's constantly evolving, meaning that every day I add a line of code or a couple of lines of code, automation, sensor, script or something like that. And if you wonder what I have, this is the total number of automations, binary sensors, cameras, lights, scripts, sensors, device trackers, entities and lines of code inside my configuration.yaml file. But to have that inside one YAML file, configuration.yaml file, 7,000 lines of code, you would probably never find what you're looking for. So that's why I followed Frank's steps. And what I did, I split everything inside its own folder and specific file. What is the benefit of this, and are there a couple of ways to do it? Yes, of course. As always, and as with everything in Home Assistant, you can do this couple of ways. One way of doing it is to follow the guides or configurations from Carlo Costanzo or Jenny, aka Pinky Wafer. They've split their configuration into packages. What is the difference between my setup and their setup? So for example, I've added GitHub, and I've added it in such a way that I created in each specific and individual folder everything related to GitHub. If we go to Automations, System, we can see that here I have Home Assistant Update Notification, Dismiss, Home Assistant Update Notifications, Travis Build. If we would then go, for example, to Entities, Sensors, you can see that here are GitHub latest issues, GitHub integration, Travis integration. The same goes for REST commands. So I've split everything between the individual folders inside its own YAML file. So if I want to add a new REST command, I would go to the folder called REST command, click here, press new file, test REST YAML file, and I would here create new REST command. There are some cons of this. For every new part of the integration, you have to create at least one new YAML file. But on the other hand, if I want to find something and I know what I'm looking for me this can be easy. I can find it in a couple of seconds. How they did it? They created packages for each individual component. So for example, Jenny, let's look at her repository. She has much simpler setup than mine in terms of quantities, files, individual files, and everything is inside the packages folder. So if we would go, for example, to GitHub, in Travis CI, she has both REST command and sensor. In the same file, she does what I do in two files. In my configuration, this will be in one file, inside the REST command folder, and this would be inside sensors folder. I know that this can be a bit overwhelming, but I just wanted to stress this out before we begin splitting our configuration, that as always, there are a couple of ways you can do the same thing, and each way has its own positive and negative sides. Okay, so how would you start splitting your configuration YAML file? First of all, before you begin doing anything, what you definitely need to do is make sure that you have a latest backup. Go to Supervisor, Snapshots, and create new snapshot. Let's create it. If you are working in a Home Assistant core and you do not have Supervisor, next best thing that you can do, especially if you're using Synology, because it would be much simpler for you to do it on a Synology, is to go to some kind of file manager. Let me go to DSM. So if you are not using Home Assistant Supervised or HAS.io, as it was previously known, go to any kind of file manager that has access to your configuration files. If you are using it on a Synology inside Docker, go to your file station. Look for a folder where you have your configuration files. For me, this will be HAS.io, Home Assistant. And what you need to do is you need to copy all the YAML files. Select all the YAML files you have in this folder and copy them somewhere safe. This is, as I said, just in case you're not running supervised. If you are running supervised, you can make a backup. But even if you are running supervised, making just a copies of YAML file will be sufficient because we will not be touching anything else than those files. Let me copy this. I will just copy them here. Yes, everything is here. Okay. Now, and only after you have backup, let's go back to our recording setup. Great, my snapshot is done, so I can start working on the configuration file. So first thing that we can do, or with what we can start, is to move all the integrations to the separate folder. Please note that we will be using packages as a way to load everything. As I said, there are a couple of ways, and I'm using packages part of the Home Assistant integration to load everything up. There is also a way for you to, let's say, keep formatting like this, but instead of using include, you could, for example, also use include dir list for directory list, or dir named, or dir merge list, or dir merged named. I will not be going in details about that. As I said, I will try to help you replicate how I've done it myself. First things first, let's create a new folder, and we will call this folder integrations. Okay, so the idea is that every integration we now have inside our Home Assistant, for example, fast.com or Tado, that we will be moving that in a separate file. So let's start doing it. First thing, for example, let's move webhook. Click on the integrations folder, create new file, call it webhook.yaml. Okay, and we will copy this into webhook file. Now that we have added this here, what we have to do in our configuration.yaml file, for now, let's comment this out. During my process of transformation of all my configuration files to my setup, I've left everything that has been disabled, but what I did is I copied it or cut it and moved it to the end of my configuration.yaml file inside section that I called disabled. Moved to new location. I know that everything beyond this point has been moved into separate file. But what would happen if I would now test my configuration or restart the system? Well, nothing, except I would lose my webhooks. Why? Because I didn't specify to Home Assistant where these files are located. How do we do that? On top, inside this part of Home Assistant, you just add packages, include dir for directory named, and name of the folder will be integrations. This one has to match the folder we created previously. Let's test this. Server control check configuration, and it says that our configuration is valid. Let's go back. So for each of those integrations here, we copy it, integrations, new file, system health.yaml. Let's paste it here. The great thing about splitting a configuration like this is that since for some integrations you only have one line, you could leave comments to yourself, your future self, because trust me, you will definitely forget at one point in time why did you install integration or what does it do. So what I do is I leave a comment. System health enables you to track HI system status over API. And next thing that I also do here is I usually put a link to the documentation from where this integration is, or somewhere that I can refer to if I want to read in the future something more about that. Let's go back to configuration. After we have added our system health into separate file, as I said, we comment it out here, and we will move this to the end of configuration.yaml file. Wow, so far we already have 2 integrations that have been moved. But those are simple integrations. So what will happen if, for example, I would want to move all my sensors? That's where things began to be a little bit tricky. So as I mentioned, I followed Frank's concept or Frank's way of splitting the configuration. What he did and what I also did is I created a folder called entities, where in future I will be keeping all entities and sensors and binary sensors, switches, input fields, all are entities inside Home Assistant. So I created a folder called entities, and inside entities folder I created also a new folder called sensors. All the sensors that I will be adding will be inside this specific folder. For start, what you can do is you can move your sensors.yaml file to sensors folder, and there you can split it. But remember, since we have specified in our configuration.yaml file previously that we will be keeping our sensors inside sensor.yaml file, we have to disable or remove that. Great, but at this point our system still wouldn't know where to find sensors. If we go back to our beginning of splitting configuration, we said that we are keeping everything inside integrations folder. And if we look at our integrations folder, there is nothing here that will point Home Assistant to where to look for sensors. The next logical step for us is to create a sensors.yaml file here. This sensors.yaml file here will be substitute for this line inside the configuration. Integrations, new file, sensors.yaml file. And inside sensors.yaml file, let's add a comment. All sensors are inside folder that is listed below. Okay, same thing that we did previously when we started configuring our system. With this sensor include sensor.yaml file, we now have to repeat here. But we will not be using include, instead we will be using include directory list. So sensor include dir directory dir list. And we now have to tell our system where the sensors are. So we can add following: 2 dots, entities, sensors. So this is telling our system that all our sensors will now be in one folder below. So this is those 2 dots, telling us to go one folder below to the root folder, and then to look for the entities folder and sensors subfolder. Don't forget to save any changes if you have to. In a Visual Studio Code you do not have, because all the changes are saved automatically. Now we have already split a lot more from our system than you think. And in order to check if everything is working, we have to go back to configuration, server control, check configuration. And as you can see, not everything is working as it should. Why? Because system is expecting something else and not the file that we have set up in our system. And as you can see, we now have a sensor, invalid configuration for sensor. This is why it's very important to always check your configuration after you make any slight change. If you do not do that, debugging or finding an error will take you 3 times, 5 times longer than it would normally do. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's go to our sensor.yaml file. And this is where the problem is. One of the problems is spacing. It has to be aligned differently. But for us that's no issue because we will move all our sensors into separate files. So let me get cracking with that. The principle is the same. We will now move this platform yr.no weather sensor. Let's create a new file, yr.yaml. Let's go back to sensors, copy everything from here, paste it here, and let's fix the spacing. Okay, it's now aligned correctly. We can now save. Our YR weather sensor has been moved. You can add here comment if you want. If you do not want to add comments, it's up to you, but really my suggestion is comment as much as you can. It can only take a couple of months and you sometimes will not forget why you did something. Sensor.yaml file, we can delete this. Next thing is launch library for space launches. Also, I would recommend that you keep a platform name as a file name. That way it will be easier for you later on to find where you've moved something. Sensor, let's remove this. 17 track. The thing that you have to be careful with is alignment. As you can see, this one is completely aligned, indented to the left, while if we look at the sensors file, it's aligned differently. Let me quickly move all those sensors from the sensor.yaml file into individual files. Okay, there are still some things that I haven't moved. Let's first clean everything out and leave only those integrations that are left here. I don't know if you see what is the difference between the other integrations and the integrations here. This is a template sensors, and those you can keep in a single file, so you can have all your template sensors in one file. This is mostly how I do it, although I do have some template sensors in individual files. But we will tackle this later on. So the other things that are still remaining here is the sensors that we have more than one instance of. So for example, we have 2 mold indicators, 2 social blade integrations, 2 DNS IP integrations, and a couple more statistic integrations for these sensors. How do you split those? Because you do need to split them in individual files. Well, it's simple. Instead of naming them by the integration or platform name, you name them according to their name. For example, first thing that we will be splitting is the social blade, and I will create 2 files. One will be called social blade bearded thinker, and the other one will be called social blade Dr. Z's. New file, social blade bt.yaml. No, it's not British Telecom. And I'll move this into this file here. And the next file will be called social blade Dr. Z's. And we will move this into this file. Okay. Let me briefly move all the other duplicate sensors inside individual files. So we are now left with only one thing, and that one thing is the template sensors. And in order for us to keep those template sensors inside one file, what we have to do is we have to fix the alignment. We have to remove the extra spacing. And now we have fixed the spacing. Well, one thing I'll do, I'll remove this template sensor because WWLLN has been removed because the data is not available anymore. Okay, so we now have each and every sensor in the individual file, plus we have one file that we will rename from sensor.yaml to sensor templates YAML file. And now we have split all the sensors into individual files, except for the templates themselves. If you are interested in splitting templates themselves, one way of doing this is to create a new file. Let's do this with ISS Next Rise. Template. You do not have to call this file template. I will add templates. I do not add templates in my system, but here I will add template just for me to know that this is a template sensor. And in that file, we will move this. But as you may guess, this will not work. What we are missing here? We are missing this part, platform template and sensors. And in order for this to work, we have to fix alignment once again. So this is how it would look if you would move all your templates, sensor templates or any other templates into individual files. As I said previously, I don't do it that way, so I'll move this back. And let's close this file and let's remove this file. Hopefully now we've fixed everything, but you can never be sure, so let's go back to configuration, server control, cross our fingers, check configuration, and now everything is fixed. At this point, what I did, I showed you how you can move your integrations and also how you can move specific parts of the Home Assistant into individual folders and files. So how would you continue with this? Next thing would be to go to configuration.yaml file. We already disabled this. Let's move it to the end. So as I said, what I would prefer, what I would do is I would move first all the integrations that are directly configured into the configuration.yaml file. So each of those, TTS, MQTT, fast.com, Tado, Octoprint, stream, Telegram bot, weather, image processing, OpenUV, Shelly, Luftdaten, so on and so on. I would move them first into the integrations folder, and then I would continue with the specific files that contain, for example, groups, scripts, binary sensors, and you do it in such a way that you add here new folder, binary sensors, and then you move the contents of the binary sensors into individual files inside the binary sensor folder. Don't forget to add here also a file called binary_sensors.yaml, where you would do the same thing as you did here. You would type binary_sensor, include their list, entities, and replace this with binary sensor. You just repeat doing that for each individual file that you want your configuration to move. I apologize since this video will probably be too long. On the other hand, I also hope that I helped you or inspired you or showed you how you can split your own configuration and move it into specific folders and create individual files for that. Of course, if you have too many files inside one sensors folder, you can create subfolders. For example, this is my configuration, and as you can see, if we go to the sensors folder, I have subfolder called system inside that sensors folder. If you want to move any file there, you do not have to add anything inside configurations file, you just create a new folder. In this case, this was systems folder, and you just move, drag and drop, copy, whatever, however you want to do it, those individual sensors inside that folder. Same thing I did in automations. I think I have around 90 automations, so I moved them into specific folders. Here are all non-sorted automations. Here I have automations that are related to the switches, so these here are related to the cube. These here are related to Xiaomi switches. Same thing goes for the system. These are system related automations. All my Telegram related automations. Automations related to utility, this includes electricity, heating, and so on. And of course, weather related automations. Well, not just weather, but weather, air control, etc. And this is it for this Home Assistant how-to video. A very long Home Assistant how-to video. I really do hope that you like this video. If you did like this video, please give me a thumbs up. It means a lot to me, but it also helps, of course, with the YouTube metrics and recommendations. If you have any kind of a question or a comment, you can always find me on the Discord server, and it's much easier to make conversation there than inside the comment section of the YouTube video. But on the other hand, if you do not use Discord or do not want to use Discord, you can leave me a message in a comment section and I will definitely try to help you out with that. If you still haven't subscribed, please subscribe and hit the bell button so you get notified on the future updates. And I'll be seeing you next time. Until then, bye bye and have fun.